Welcome to today's episode of the Kianistan podcast. I'm delighted to say that joining us today, we have Kajsa Ekis Ekman. Kajsa is a Swedish journalist and author known for her work for human rights and women's rights. She's done a lot for the plight of the people in Cuba and also Palestine. And today I was hoping to get Kajsa's thoughts and analysis on this illegal war of aggression being waged on Iran. So Kajsa, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor. Great talking to you.
Pleasure is completely mine. Kajsa, before we do get started, would you mind maybe taking a bit of time to just tell us a bit more about your background?
Yeah, so I'm a Swedish author and journalist. I've written 4 books on issues such as women's rights, capitalism, economic crisis, things like that. So I also run an intellectual magazine, a monthly magazine in Swedish called Press.
Oh.
And I'm a literary critic at Sweden's major daily Aftonbladet, where I review both nonfiction and fiction alike. And I also travel around a lot to lecture, specifically right now about prostitution and surrogacy, which are topics that when I wrote my book on these 2 topics, 15, 16 years ago, I didn't think that, I'd be 2 decades later lecturing about them. But it's all these countries are thinking about whether to legalize or to ban. So that's where I come in. And lately I've also been internationally involved, written a lot about Latin America, Middle East, and anti-imperialism, basically.
Thank you. Yes, recently I heard some of your talks on surrogacy, and I completely agreed with what you were saying. I was talking to my wife and my daughter about it. And I think those talks are really important. If anyone wants, we can maybe even leave a link at with the show notes. But Kajsa, also, you've just returned from Cuba. Could you tell us what were you doing there? And also, what is the situation that you found in Cuba?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of media coverage about Cuba lately. Generally, when there's media coverage on Cuba in the West, it tends to be not very positive. There is a very long-going anti-Cuba campaign aimed at portraying Cuba as a place where nothing is working, it's just misery and things like that. And I think the point of that campaign essentially is to discourage tourism. So it would be a surprise to most people when they go there and they see it's really not like that at all. It's a beautiful country, and it's a country that, despite the longest blockade in history, which the U.S. blockade is, there's never been an embargo that long. Cuba is standing up, it's resisting, and the blockade is forcing the country to modernize, in a way that other countries would be envious. Like right now, they're doing solar panels, electric tricycles, things like that, so as to reduce the dependency on oil, because the U.S. is, after kidnapping Maduro, not letting Venezuela sell any oil, and also trying to put pressure on Mexico. But I'll tell you, the situation is not as bad as they're trying to portray it.
Really?
Again, I think that it makes me mad when I see even some left-wing, well-meaning anti-imperialists go there taking pictures of, an empty street or a pile of trash. So I think that that's wrong to do that. When people go to Paris, there's misery there too, but they take pictures with the Eiffel Tower. But whenever they go to a third world place, only take pictures of misery. They all believe themselves to be journalists, asking each and every one they meet about the situation and then publishing random people's opinion as if they were journalists, and had to document everything and had to find out everything. Whereas when you go to Paris, when you go to New York, you take pictures of the most beautiful things. You're on vacation, you take pictures of the food that you eat, and generally make more people interested in going there. So, and I don't know why people going to Cuba are they're right now there's a salsa festival going on. It was fully packed, lots of Cuban people listening to live salsa. There's all these parties going on. The restaurants are open, taxis are running, from the airport into the city and back. Why would you hide that reality if it weren't for the fact that you were actively trying to discourage tourism?
So true.
So that's why I'm against like this kind of disaster propaganda campaigns
I
that
can very much
people in the
relate.
left are engaged in.
I can relate to that. I my family comes from Pakistan, and we don't have a lot of tourists there. But when we do have some, I've noticed a lot that they kind of go looking for the worst possible kind of depressing scenes and try to capture that, which is fine. But then don't solely do that. Have a balanced kind of show some like the other side of things as well. Um,
Yeah,
also,
because they're not doing that here in Stockholm. Like anytime a tourist comes,
yeah,
like I just know that they've been to the inner city, which is the most beautiful historic
mm,
parts, the old town and things. And I know they've seen the castle, they've seen like the Vasa Museum, and they're like, Stockholm is so beautiful. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I know it is, but that's not the place where people live. Like if you want to see how people live, you'd see a different reality.
so
And they're
true.
like, oh, I didn't have time to do that. Then okay, that's fine. You're a tourist. But why is it when you go to a place outside of Europe and the US, all of a
Yeah,
sudden, like it's misery
it flips.
tourism, like
Yeah.
just want to see bad stuff. Man, Cuba's a beautiful country
Mm,
and it's standing up and they're also so used to having an embargo on themselves. So
mm.
if anybody knows how to deal with this, it's them. So Cuba is not a failed state, it's not collapsed. Cuba is standing up and everybody who hears this, go there. Like, there's no danger. You will not be robbed. You're going to have a wonderful time.
So true. And I've heard they have an amazing health system and very educated doctors and engineers.
Look, I mean, everybody I met there has like 2 different degrees and not degrees like in the same field. I mean, I've met people who've been like lawyers and engineers at the same time.
Wow.
They're like artists and doctors. And also like during their free time, they tend to also develop like the culture side of themselves. Like most people play an instrument, write poetry, dance, paint, like anything like that, So the human level is, so high that when you're there, you feel like half a human being.
It's amazing. It kind of reminds me of Palestine, Gaza as well. Apparently, by population, they have the most number of graduates in the world.
Wow.
Yes, it is amazing. Even if you look at like presidents in other countries, like Iranian presidents, they are quite often PhDs or doctors, and so they have a life outside of politics as well. But in Europe, we don't really have that anymore.
Yeah, it's gotten very specialized in Europe. Like people are just doing one thing and then they get really into that, And
Yeah.
the sad thing is that I mean, we take capitalism for granted. It's like we just think that's the air we breathe. I mean, we don't think there could be a system beyond capitalism.
Yes.
And when you look at Cuba, you see, and sometimes I think a lot of people in Cuba don't see that until they go abroad as well. Like you see that what living outside of capitalism has done is create a different kind of human being, which is not hateful, not jealous, not corrupted, but just generally, the highest level of human being that I have seen.
Amazing.
And I'm not saying like, okay, of course you can go to Cuba, you can meet, scammers and you can meet people who are unfaithful and you can meet whatever type of person, just like anywhere. But what I mean is that Cuba really lacks the hatred that we have between different groups in Europe.
Yes, and it's getting worse here. Kasha, also, let's turn towards Iran. So how do you see? It's only been Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday. It's only been about 4 days, and how have we got to 5 days now? How have we got to this stage? How do you see? If you could kind of summarize a little bit your thoughts.
Well, I think every day that the U.S. doesn't change the regime in Iran is a day one for anti-imperialists everywhere. Because all these battles of invasion are asymmetric. The empire spends a lot more money than the country defending itself. So it's for Iran, I don't think it's even about winning. It's about just hanging on in there. like just, standing up and, making the U.S. spend as much money as possible, trying to deter them. And I think they're doing great by just attacking all these military bases, because that forces the enemy to move around and to find other places from which they can attack.
Yes.
So I think it's really a smart strategy what they're doing and just holding up. I think this is a decisive battle for countries everywhere in the globe that are at risk of U.S. invasion. I think if the U.S. Has like a swift victory in Iran, that's
Yes.
going to be very dangerous for other countries. But if this gets prolonged, they have to, bring in troops and things like that, I think they're going to wait a very long time until they start a war again.
I think she's all right. Kasia, also, I was just thinking, if we look at the past wars that USA, illegal wars that they've waged, if we look at the Gulf War, for example, there was a lot of build up to it. This time around, they didn't take anything, obviously, through Congress, but also they didn't even try to sell the war to their own people or try to build like a coalition like they used to in the past. And I'm just wondering, do you think is that because of the hubris that they have, or do you think that they realize that they don't have a case and there was no imminent threat?
Yeah, so I think Donald Trump is less of an imperialist than a colonialist. You see, like with imperialism, and if you look at the Iraq war, it took so long. They went to the UN, there was talk about who was going to be in it, who was not. There was this whole legal argument, that finally in the end, it was just, actually nonsense. But, at least it was like there was a discussion on like, when is it right to invade another country? Of course, the obvious answer would be it's never right to invade a country because, you have no business there at all. But anyway, there was this whole thing that supposedly this was done for a good reason. I mean, now, both with this and with Venezuela, we haven't had any of that. So he doesn't care what we think. I don't think he cares to justify invasions or to even build up a kind of image of, I'm spreading democracy or this is for the women. I mean, basically, he's letting the Europeans take care of the explanation.
Yes.
So it's kind of funny how like European media and European politicians are pretending that this whole thing is about democracy or about the women or about, people killed in the massacre when Donald Trump has said none of the sort.
Yes. And it's amazing how Europe's sitting there trying to criticize Iran for retaliating against the aggressive attacks that the war's been waged on Iran, just as they were on the brink of trying to get a deal so that there is no war. But America just wouldn't take yes for an answer.
Yeah, I mean, like at this point, once they fire the first shot, like, or threw the first bomb, it's just propaganda at this point. Like, you're just going to have to look at what's really behind, because what's in the media at this stage of a war generally can't be trusted.
Interestingly, also, it seems like as they've realized that things aren't entirely going to plan, they're making a little bit more of an effort to now actually retrospectively sell the war to the people. So they're trying to say there was an imminent threat. Marco Rubio said recently. So the threat was apparently that they realized that Israel is going to attack Iran one way or the other. And then as that happens, Iran is going to retaliate. So there was an imminent threat of Iran's retaliation for the attack that Israel was going to do based on the information that America was going to provide Israel. And it's like your mind just boggled.
Yeah, I don't even know whether they're trying to justify something or I don't even know what's the point of that type of statement, because basically they're admitting that Israel is the one big danger and threat to peace in the region.
Yeah.
As we've seen at this point, I'm just so disappointed with Europe. We just had celebrated or commemorated last week 40 years since the murder of our late Prime Minister Olof Palme, who was a great voice for peace in Sweden. And I'm just thinking we haven't had anybody since him, like, let alone in Sweden, but in Europe, a strong leader that would actually take a distance from the American imperialists and put his foot down. Now I think in Spain, Pedro Sanchez, he's trying a bit. I appreciate that. I hope more countries are going to follow. I hope he doesn't, succumb to the bullying of Donald Trump, who says that he's now going to cut off trade with Spain. But I think from the anti-imperialist standpoint, I think it's good that Donald Trump is talking about taking Greenland, that he wants to stop trading with Spain, because what that's going to accelerate is the breakup between Europe and the US. Yes. So the sooner the better. So I just hope more of this, because my nightmare is that, like Donald Trump already has most of the Arab world on his side. He has Europe on his side. He has some key Latin American countries on his side. Brazil is weak. Brazil didn't even let Venezuela get into BRICS. Lula's, he's flaky. And then you have outright fascists like in Argentina and now in Chile. So, for this kind of multipolar world that everybody's been talking about for ages, like for that to really happen, we need to break up things like NATO and the EU and all these alliances.
Yes, I think I agree. For me, one of the most hopeful things that's coming out of all of this is this rapture that's appearing between America and Europe, and finally, maybe Europe can start thinking for itself.
Yeah, hopefully, because, in a lot of our countries, it's just looking worse than ever. Like our governments they even sent soldiers to Greenland pretending they were protecting it from, China and Russia, when everybody knows that's not the case, that they can't even say
just to appease
they're there to protect it against Donald Trump. So, yeah.
Kajsa, also, I'm very surprised by the fact that it seems like the U.S. administration is repeatedly being surprised by Iran. So first of all, apparently, Witkoff said that Trump was shocked and surprised and dismayed that Iran didn't capitulate before the war started, just by seeing the build-up of all the forces that were kind of encircling Iran. So Trump was surprised that Iran didn't capitulate. And then now that they've started the war, they're surprised that Iran's retaliated the way it's retaliated, when all Iran is doing is what it said it'll do. So either they're not listening to Iran, or they don't care what Iran's saying, and they've made up their own kind of, in their mind, kind of a story. And now that the story isn't the events aren't following the story that they had in mind, they're constantly being surprised. So it just shows that either there's a big failure of intelligence in America, or the small number of people that are in charge of everything just are completely detached from reality.
No, but they are dumb. They're seriously dumb. Like, honestly, you guys were 20 years in Afghanistan, and now you're facing like a similar country, basically the same people with lots of more weapons, and you thinking that's going to work?
Yes.
Like, honestly, you couldn't even get anywhere in Afghanistan, and now you think that Iran, which is so armed to its teeth, developed country, is just going to capitulate. And, isn't that the story of the U.S.? I don't think they've ever won a war in their history. All they do is create chaos and kill people and kidnap people, but they're never building anything up. There's been different empires in the world, but I think this is seriously one of the worst, that they're not leaving anything good behind. Like, anything that's coming out of there is like just crap. It's like bad culture, bad food. The music is okay, but that's about it. But like death and destruction.
It's so true. And it's also so true that even if we don't agree with what they're doing, if it seemed like that they've thought it through for themselves, so they have a plan and they're working towards that, but it seems like they have no plan. So the 12-day war that they had in June last year, guest after guest that we had on our show, but so many other independent analysts that I listened to, people with military background and all sorts of people, they were saying that Iran has so many missiles and such a huge stockpile of missiles that Iran could carry this for a long, long time. And Israel, being such a small country, simply cannot kind of withstand that kind of onslaught that they're going to get from Iran, which is exactly what happened. And now nothing's really changed. Israel's still the same size that it was. It still has the same vulnerabilities, but it was just insisting that we want this war because they thought if they can just get rid of the Ayatollah or maybe the president, then Iran is going to capitulate and Iran is just going to fall to pieces. So again, I think in their mind, they've built this whole story that has no kind of basis in reality. But they don't care. They just keep pushing.
We're emboldened by Syria and Venezuela because both of those takeovers went really fast.
Yes.
And they don't understand that countries like Cuba and Iran are different. And why are they different? Because the people there took power in a revolution. Mm. They weren't handed power like, on a plate. And I think it's different. It's different when you have a president that's either installed by a foreign power or, has inherited power from his dad or, somebody that you voted for, because somehow in all these cases, you're passive, it leaves the people passive, right?
Yes.
But if you have a country where you've taken power.
Yes.
Yeah. So in both Cuba and Iran, I mean, they're very different countries, of course. In Iran, religion plays a big role and in Cuba, it doesn't at all. So societies as such are very different. But, the similarity is that power came out of a popular revolution and out of the barrel of a gun. And because of that, people are a lot more invested in their country. The people in both of those countries, a lot of them have been through several wars.
Yes.
They've fought for their place. They're not just going to give it up. And this is where the West always makes the same mistake. They think that any country that's outside imperialism is a dictatorship, but the leader is just some loosely hanging figure that you can just take away and then, and people are just going to thank you and then replace them by somebody else. It doesn't work that way. It's a lot deeper than that.
Yes.
Very often in a country where you've had a revolution, the people that didn't like it, mostly the upper class, have left. So they are in exile.
Yeah.
They're not that big of a force. Neither do they have that much support in the country itself to take over or to make revolution. So what do? They're relying on empire to actually put them there, to invade, do the work for them, put them back in power. Mostly they sit around and complain in Western media. Their country is so bad, everything is awful, everything is misery, things like that. You can see the Venezuelans, for example, how they're just like Machado, she couldn't win an election. She couldn't make a revolution. So she gave her Nobel Prize to Trump because she's thinking that he's going to put her there. So
did he take that? Did he?
They can't do anything themselves.
I think with hindsight, Trump and America are going to realize that what happened in Venezuela, the success of that operation that they had, is the worst possible thing that could have happened to America, because that kind of got to Trump's head, and which has then led him to what he's done in Iran.
Yeah, I'm still not clear about my analysis on Venezuela. Who governs it? Where is it standing now? I think it was a kind of half coup. It was you're leaving the whole, ruling party in power. You're just removing one person, but at the same time, you completely change the direction of the country. And, I don't know whether this is going to last, whether this is what he's planning in Iran too. It looks like it.
Yep.
It looks like he's now not going to, if he could, which I hope and I doubt that he can, he's not going to place the son of the king, the prince. He's not going to place him there because he knows that that's not going to work. So he's trying to find this Delcy Rodriguez solution, in Venezuela, somebody. I think he's trying to break them up and find somebody there who can take over and make the country change course as, fast as possible and as cheaply as possible for the U.S.
Yes. But I also think there's a big difference, and maybe it's going to become more and more apparent. There's a big difference between what USA is hoping for and what Israel is hoping for. Because America might be hoping to have some kind of regime change and have someone different that then ultimately America can do business with. Not that they couldn't have done business with this current regime, but still. And on the other hand, Israel has no kind of such ambitions. They just want the country balkanized, broken up into pieces, so that they can come and do exactly what they're doing with with Syria to come and destroy all of the bases, make sure they have no military, make sure that they're fighting with each other for the next 20 years.
Yeah, so I remember there was this discussion with the Women Life Freedom movement. And then, this has always been, like, so the royalists in exile, generally they don't want for Iran to be broken up into different parts.
Yes.
So that's also why they haven't been acting, because they're scared that the whole thing is going to break up and it's going to become worse. And then they were reassured by their partners in the U.S. at that time, as far as I understood, that that was not a plan, that was not going to happen. And now you see the U.S. is talking to the Kurds, who all of a sudden are posting everywhere that now they're going to get their own Kurdistan, like from Iran. And then, of course, all the other groups as well are being used, to break up Iran. And oof,
yes.
I don't know if the royalists are going to end up regretting this in the end. Like,
definitely,
this was not what we're hoping for.
And I think this is the thing. I think absolutely you're right. The only real organized, if you could call it an opposition, which is like a small percentage of what's going on in Iran, is the Kurdish people. But they were hoping that they don't have to use the Kurdish people because of the more they mobilize the Kurdish people and give them arms, the more it's going to freak out Turkey, which is going to cause so many other problems. But that's kind of what they're doing. And I heard somewhere as well that apparently there was a lot of weapons being shifted to the Kurdish people even before this war started in Iran. And Turkey kind of informed Iran of a lot of people coming into Iran from Iraq with a lot of weapons, and Iran was able to take them all out. So there Turkey kind of worked with Iran to make sure that they were suppressed. So I think that's going to cause a huge amount of regional problems.
Yeah, I think it's very typical that the U.S. is always trying to exploit like pre-existing differences or pre-existing contradictions within a society between like ethnic groups, for example, between classes and things like that. It just makes you sad because like these things, like once they blow up, like in former Yugoslavia and things like that, you see that they don't go away. Like once you weaponize ethnicity to that point, this goes for generations and generations. And these were people that lived together under Tito and they were fine. There was intermarriage, there was no such thing as, and then people started shooting at their neighbor, like, and who's behind that? Who is blowing up these ethnic differences? And it's like the Middle East, now we have this like, Jews and Muslims kind of, antagonism, that wasn't there before the state of Israel. Like they were living fine together.
I even heard BBC has had some awful interviews where they're picking up individual people from Iran on the telephone saying that we're so happy, please come and attack us. And obviously there's going to be that small number of people in any country, but they're not kind of giving any other side of the story to say that there's more than one opinion inside Iran. It's a diverse, huge country. But anyway, there was one interview where they were saying that we did speak to one person inside Iran who was anti the regime in Iran. But she was saying that she doesn't want any of this to happen because she was saying, give me one example where the West attacked a country and removed the government and the end result was anything other than disaster. And the BBC reporter had to go quiet because she couldn't think of anything.
I actually can't think of one example either.
No.
And I think the problem is structural, like it's not ideological. The problem is that if you don't take power, you're not good at being in power. And as harsh as that might sound, you might think, oh, it's terrible. Look, people are being massacred. Like, how can the world allow this? Like, the world has to intervene. No, because the UN is designed to handle conflicts between states, not conflicts within states, because that's the state's own problem. And, as harsh as it may sound, if you don't like what's going on in your country, you have to do something about it. Like, you can't start calling for foreign powers to intervene and do it for you, because, if they do it for you, it's an artificial solution.
Exactly.
but you don't know whether this has any base in the country at all.
Yes.
You see, like, for every country that's outside of imperialism, like, you have some kind of puppet that's waiting to go in there, just like the prince. And then you have Marco Rubio saying he's going to be the president of Cuba, which is laughable because, even his parents immigrated in 56 during Batista. So, like, he's no Cuban, like, even his parents are no Cuban anymore. Like, and he thinks he's going to go in there and take over, just like Maria Corina Machado in Venezuela. So every country has that kind of lazy person who is just thinking like, oh, I think they're just going to put me there.
In this current war that's going on with Iran, it seems like all the players that want to get the regime removed in Iran, the government, the regime, it seems like they are all they all want to get the regime removed, but no one wants to put any sacrifices in themselves. So Israel apparently was, as they were pushing Trump to attack, they were sending signals to Iran to say this has nothing to do with Israel. So please, in your retaliation, don't come to us. It's between you and USA. So they were happy to basically sacrifice USA lives in the attack of Iran rather than Israeli lives themselves. And similarly,
wants to die. I mean,
yeah. And similarly, so America is saying that we want boots on the ground, but we can't put American boots on the ground because we don't want American casualties. So they're kind of wanting to get the Iranian people out on the streets. And the people must be saying that if you want boots on the ground, bring your own bloody army. Like, what do you want from us?
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, you started it. I mean, you have to finish it. I mean, I just think these artificial solutions, it's what we saw in Afghanistan or even in Iraq or in Libya, like they don't generally tend to last because you're imposing a government, that you're picking out from random people that have managed to, somehow make their way to you and talk for themselves and explain why they're the best person to take over. And they've convinced you that they have lots of support and they're very popular, but they're not at all. And then you end up having a fake government that has no roots at all.
Yes.
And of course, there's going to be parallel structures in the country that do have some kind of, anchor. And you're going to get, like in Libya, that you have, not even a stable government that actually has control over the whole country. And I think the U.S. knows that, and they just know that that's better for them than having a country that's hostile.
So true. I interviewed Maltese former foreign minister on this show once. And one of the things that he said to me always sticks to me is that, like, he was so dismayed because basically what's going on in Libya has a lot of impact on what's happening inside Malta as well. But he was saying before they had actually, before the fall of Gaddafi, apparently the tribesmen in Libya came to, I think it was Javier Solana, but one of the top diplomats in the European Union, and said, give us a little bit of time because we're convinced that we can convince Gaddafi to step aside and let there be a transition, but just give us a few weeks. And they refused. They said, no, it's time for war, no talks. But so who knows what could have happened?
Yeah, and who's talking about Libya now? And this is what I hate. Like, I hate the fact that the U.S. just leaves a trail of ruins behind them. And, nobody goes back and tries to find out, like, what really happened, evaluate the whole situation. Like, how did it become this way?
Yes.
There's always this kind of, like, urgency and pressure. And now everybody has to post about Iran. And if you don't think that they should be bombed, like, oh, you are this and you are that, and you love dictatorship, fundamentalism, anti-Semitism and whatnot, in a couple of years, whatever happens, nobody's going to talk about it. Like, who talks about Afghanistan now?
Yes.
An international debate. Like, people are forgotten because the U.S. is not going in there anymore. So that's it.
Exactly the same is going to happen with Ukraine.
With Ukraine, look, I don't know, because it seems to be like some kind of stalemate since a long, long time that's not moving anywhere. And I mean, I am thinking that both sides want to be able to save face by declaring it a victory somehow. And I think Europe is actually the part here that cannot backtrack because we invested so much political capital in this.
Yes. and we want Ukraine to keep fighting until there's any Ukrainians left.
Yeah, I mean, basically, most of our politicians from left to right have convinced at least themselves that, this is the forefront of, the fight for democracy in the world. And if we don't stop Putin, he's going to be the new Napoleon and take over all our countries. And he's going to come here and he's going to go there. And, he has to be stopped.
There's no evidence of that, but they have convinced themselves. They are absolutely convinced of that. Kajsa, also talking of American strategy, how do you see them taking out Ayatollah Khamenei? How has that benefited USA and the war effort at all?
So there's different opinions on that. Look, I was just in Cuba, and Fidel Castro was the subject of, or the object of, like several hundred assassination attempts.
Mm-hmm.
But Cuba protected him, so he died of old age. And they have this philosophy that you have to protect your leader at all costs.
Yes.
They have a saying that's like, el mérito es estar vivo, like the point is to stay alive, right? And if you look at us, for example, we didn't manage to protect Olof Palme. He was murdered. The U.S. didn't protect Kennedy. He was killed. Venezuela couldn't protect Maduro. He was kidnapped, and so I see it as a negative thing now for Iran that, that leader was murdered. I couldn't sleep that night. I was extremely worried. Now people there are saying that this has united the country in a way that the U.S. could not expect. And I think the U.S. is committing the usual error there, that they think the leader is just a loose thing that's hanging up there. Whereas if he does have popular support, his killing will just unite people even more.
Yes.
And I think that's what's happening. I mean, I know that diaspora people are celebrating. They're, of course, really happy about this. I mean, I understand their viewpoint, too.
Yeah.
Of course. They're in the right to celebrate. Like, man, if somebody took out Donald Trump, most likely the Americans would celebrate. I still wouldn't think it's the right thing because you don't do that. But of course, people will be happy about it. I think most Americans would be happy about it. If somebody took out Netanyahu, like even I would celebrate, even though it's not my country, but I would go, yeah, even though I don't think it's right. So that's human. I understand that. But I think it was a loss for Iran. I don't know why he was not hiding. Like maybe he wanted to be martyred.
I think I agree with both of those points. From an American point of view, I actually think this is going to backfire on America. I think a better strategy for them would have been to keep him alive, but to kill his image, to repeatedly say, where's your leader? He's hiding in some bunker. You guys are out there dying, and your leader doesn't have the courage to come out. So kind of keep at it. But from an Iranian point of view, I know there's now saying that he had a desire to go out as a martyr. But I don't completely buy that because, first of all, when the attack happened, the news from Iran, so the news of his death didn't come straight away from Iran. It came from Israel and America first before Iran could actually then come and confirm it. And secondly, that would have been more like a suicide mission than actual martyrdom. And thirdly, if that was the case, he wouldn't want to take so many people with him because he may decide he wants to go as a martyr himself, but to have like 30, 40 people there, the most important people, and have meetings with them at their home. But I think with Iran, repeatedly, they've made these mistakes where they've kind of, whether it was Qasem Soleimani or Ismail Haniyeh, who died in Iran, I think repeatedly they've somehow let their guard down. So I think it's a loss on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, during the past years, we've seen many Palestinian leaders being killed. Too many, in my opinion. Like when they took Abu Ubaidah, I said, no, now, I don't want to believe this. Like, this is too much now. I mean, come on. Like, I understand, they want to be fighting alongside their people. They wanted to show that they're not hiding somewhere abroad. I mean, like, some of them, the way they were killed, I mean, they were actually killed on the battlefield.
Yes.
I think that's impressive, but I still think, what were you doing out there by yourself? I didn't see anybody with you. Like, how can that be? You have to protect your leader. Like, it's the most important person.
Yes.
So, yeah, I also don't think it was a suicide mission because, then how come they were denying it for so many hours and saying, no, he's alive and well.
Yes.
And when all of a sudden, no, actually, when they actually gathered and realized that, we're going to have to say this.
So I think there is a lot of fog of war over there. I think from both sides, it's not entirely clear. Also, Kajsa, how do you see how Iran has hit all of so many countries in the region? I think they've hit like maybe 9 or 10 countries and about 27 different military bases of America around the region. And it's something that they've always been saying that they're going to do it, but even I didn't expect that to happen so suddenly and so early on in the war. How do you see that as a strategy from Iran?
Yeah, I mean, it's great because it makes you think, like the U.S. convinced all these places, like, if you get our bases, you're going to be safe.
Yes.
Look, that like, you're a target. Okay. Like, it's like Sweden just, a couple of years ago, we signed the DCA treatment where we now have 17 military bases.
They need to think.
They're used by the Americans, and even they can bring nuclear weapons. Okay.
Good luck.
So, and somehow our media and our politicians sold this to us as, this is going to be a protection for you against the Russians. But if you read the actual treaty, it says nothing about protection. This is all for their sake.
Yes.
They can use it for their purpose.
Exactly what's happening.
Us.
Yes.
So, I mean, for all these countries to realize that if you have an American base now, you're a target, and even your airport's going to be targeted, like even other places, like high buildings. So it makes them think. And I hope that every country in the region and in the world is going to reflect now. Yep. Do we want to be a target? Because you have to think about also, the amount of money that all these countries are losing, like by the day when the airports are closed, when the oil transport cannot go as usual. Flights are down, like there's all these things that make them lose money. So I'm hoping now that all these Arab countries are calling Trump saying, you have to stop this because we cannot afford this war and we have nothing to do with it.
Yes.
And, it makes me kind of like, okay, so we have this word in Swedish, like skadeglädje. So they have it in German too, like schadenfreude. And it means that you're like, you're a little bit happy about saying like, what did I tell you? Yeah. And during the whole genocide of Palestinians, like all these like imperialist puppet regimes in, the Arab world and around have been kind of like smirking, saying like, oh, that's what you get because, you're just protesting and you're just doing all these things. Like if you were like us and just, agreed with them, like you would be fine. Like, look at us, we're rich. We're doing anything that we want to do. But,
we're talking about oil pipelines and
And now you see there's a downside to it as well.
Yeah, exactly. All of these countries, they're furious because they're saying USA is preoccupied with protecting Israel and has no time for the protection of these regional countries that are being attacked. But I think there's two things about that. One is obviously at the start of this whole war, they had limited kind of project interceptors to begin with, so they were always going to use that to protect themselves and Israel. But secondly, I don't think that they actually thought that Iran's going to go ahead and do what they just did and just kind of attack all of the air bases, military bases in the whole region. So I think they were like completely unprotected. And there is no way that America can now move all of even if they wanted, not that they're going to, but even if they wanted, in time, they couldn't move their defenses away from where they are and then take them to Saudi Arabia or UAE or any of these countries. So good luck to those countries because apparently they only have like 4 or 5 days of defense interceptors left themselves.
Wow. Yeah, it's a crazy situation right now because, all around the world, like there are people that are sitting and just hoping for Iran to win this war. And it's people of different religions, and different ideologies. Like it has nothing to do with that at this point.
Yeah.
Like it's not a kind of alliance of faith or something like that. It's more than that. It's kind of like an alliance of everybody who has been the victims of imperialism is hoping for Iran to win this. I mean, like when the US attacked, like I was in Havana, Cuba, and I was at the bus stop and I just told somebody like, "Oh my God," because I just saw it and I said, "Look at this. They're attacking Iran." And he turns to me and he says, "Look, I got goosebumps." And he says, I hope Iran, like, they hit them hard. Like, come on, you gotta like get back at them.
Yes.
And I think that sentiment's like everywhere. Like, there's so many people around the world that are right now, like, they might not agree with the internal politics of Iran, but they're still hoping for them to win so bad because it's going to be so decisive.
Exactly. I think that's exactly my own point of view as well. I don't really have an opinion on whether this particular system in Iran is good for the Iranian people or not. That's for Iranian people to decide. For me, sitting outside, to make an opinion on whether this system is the right system for Iran or not, I couldn't be. My opinion doesn't matter at all. On this show, I've had a number of people who are anti the regime and have had really kind of valid points about how the system isn't working for them, and there's a lot of corruption inside Iran, and all of those things are there. But it's not for external forces. It's not for America or the West to wage a war in Iran to replace the system because it's not working for them. I'm against that, and that's why I want Iran to win.
Yeah, also it takes a very long time to build up a system, but it goes real fast to tear it down. And I think at this point, like for any country that's threatened by US imperialism, like the most important thing is structure. It's not even like, other things such as the West might think are important, like rights for different groups or a liberal democracy or anything like that. Like, that's way beyond. Like, the most important thing is structure.
Yeah.
Like, if you have a structure, you're holding together, because worse than a dictatorship is total chaos. That's way worse.
Yes.
So when a country descends into total chaos and, arms from a war are lingering around and let loose, and different groups are coming up and starting all these regional wars and, quest for power, those things can go on for the longest time. And, corruption and all these things are happening like an aftermath of a war. So, I mean, I really think it's important for any country that has a structure to hold on to it. Don't let go, because to build up that infrastructure, it takes a really long time. And, there used to be a time when the Arab world was more or less united and they all had countries with structure. And they were united against, imperialism in Israel. And now, like, most of those countries have either, been attacked, descended into some kind of fragmented state, or been taken over by imperialism. And this is really sad.
That is so true. I kind of belong to the Sunni side of Islam. And one of our most kind of famous imams, Imam Malik, he famously said that it's better to have 40 years rule of a tyrant than to have 2 years of chaos and infighting. And I think that's completely right, because a civil war, infighting, that's going to have like an impact for generations and generations. Whereas like an orderly, even if the system's not great, it can be changed from within. But once you have like a violent change, we see what's happening in Libya, we see what's happening in Syria. It just never really works out.
So I think if you look at what the US prefers from their standpoint, I mean, the ideal is what they have in Europe, which are stable democracies, which, are always going to be allies no matter, what people vote for. So in our country, like, we have like 8 or 9 political parties of some, reasonable size. All of them are pro-American. Like, we have no opposition when it comes to international politics. So that's the US like best option. The second best option is to have a dictatorship that's a stable ally like Saudi Arabia or a place like that, because you have the people in power that are always going to support you. And of course, apartheid states are the best, like Israel and South Africa, because they need to be your ally. Otherwise, they can't maintain the occupation and the apartheid system because it's so expensive. So there's no way you can maintain an apartheid system without a powerful ally like the U.S. and vice versa. If Israel wasn't an apartheid state, if everybody had, the right to vote, Palestinians and Israelis, and I'm talking about, Palestine and Israel, not just inside of what is Israel. I'm talking about all the places that Israel controls, like the West Bank and Gaza. If everybody got, one person, one vote, it wouldn't be an apartheid state and it wouldn't be a U.S. ally. So that's why they need, from the U.S. standpoint, to keep the apartheid state. Now, after that, what they prefer is chaos. Because even chaos, from their standpoint, they can send people to protect their oil fields. Like that's so, even that is better than a stable country with a stable government, a stable dictatorship that's against the U.S. That's and their worst nightmare, and this is something that's not allowed to exist worldwide, is a stable democracy that's anti-American.
Yes.
Why is that unheard of? Like, the pro-Americans would say, oh, that's because all our enemies are dictatorship. No, that's because every time that somebody votes for a government that's against you, you use the openness that is a democracy to undermine that very democracy and create a coup d'etat, lawfare, military coup, and whatnot. Like, you see what's happening in Latin America ever since Allende in 1973, and then you have Bolivia, Ecuador, like all these countries where they're using the fact that there is a democracy to undermine it somehow. Right. They buy judges and they buy newspapers and they buy army generals. So that just is an impossibility. And that's why it leaves us with this dilemma that us anti-imperialists...
That's how we have Bashar al-Assad and Hafiz al-Assad, because that's the only way that a state can exist in opposition to USA.
That's the thing. And that's why they always say, well, you're pro-dictatorship. No, my friend, I'm not pro-dictatorship. But you know what? If you look at the countries that kept their type of Western liberal democracy in Latin America, for example, in the left-wing, pink tide, they were all overthrown in some way or another because the U.S. and CIA, they're just scheming all along. So it just doesn't work. Like, if you want to, keep your power, then you have to hold on to it. And that means taking control of different sectors of society.
So it becomes a police state.
It becomes like that, and then of course you have countries that are, I understand, like people in Syria, they, maybe Assad went too far and that's why nobody protected him. Because he put too many people in prison. But I can tell you in Cuba, they don't do that. In Cuba, they don't torture people. They don't put people in prison for what they believe. There's no law that says that you can't say what you think. So it's a different kind of place.
So Kajsa, also, maybe my last question is like, how do you see, because I think whatever happens with this war that started, that never should have started really, but now that it has started, whatever the outcome, I think is going to have huge implication for the entire region. Whether if Iran wins, Iran's going to come out a very different state than it was. And the regional countries, as you were talking about before, once they now actually realize that having USA bases means nothing in terms of security for that country itself, they have to, if they want security, they have to produce it themselves for their own countries. And obviously, if USA loses this war, or if basically by losing, I mean if they can't topple the Iranian regime, which it seems unlikely, who knows what would happen. But if that happens, that's going to cause a huge, like a domino effect of different states thinking, hang on, America isn't as powerful as we thought it was.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm kind of hoping for, because if not, Trump is going to think he's immortal and he can get away with everything, and he's just going to go around and take over all these places. So I think, just for him to get involved in, the worst thing, the worst American nightmare is what they call a quagmire. Like they're always worried about this quagmire because in Vietnam they got into a quagmire, and now in Iraq they got into a quagmire, and now they're thinking, no, it's going to be swift. So anytime you're talking about sending troops, like that term just comes up. Oh no, it's another quagmire. So I'm just hoping, like, either that they just realize this and back off, and I don't care what excuse they come up with. Like Trump can invent that it was a victory. I don't care as long as he leaves.
Yeah, exactly. We'll all say, yeah, hurrah, you were great. Just get the hell out of here.
Yeah, just get out, and the second best for us is if he, starts getting involved and just, and actually, has another Afghanistan. It's just very.
I just can't see Trump doing another Afghanistan. He gets bored so quickly. I don't think he's got, like, his attention span is so small. Even like, at least he has that ability, like what he did in Yemen. He went in, realized this isn't going anywhere, and he just came out and said, oh, we won, they lost, and they apologized, they begged us for forgiveness, and this is what it is. So he might do that, but I don't see him kind of going in for the long haul. It's not his way. But on the other hand, I don't see how Iran is going to end this, knowing that if they end it like they ended the war in June, that will just allow USA and Israel to just go away and arm themselves all over again and come back in 6 months again. So I find it more tricky from an Iranian point of view of how to end this whole thing.
Yeah, I think, in the long run, what's going to have to happen if we're going to have some peace and stability in this world is that, all the BRICS countries are going to have to unite, create a real alliance, not just based on like exchange and economy and things like that. They're going to have like their own NATO. They're going to have their own currency.
Yes.
They're going to have to work together because you see now the world is just too unstable to live in. And I just miss the Soviet Union a lot because during the Soviet Union, like we didn't have all these genocides going on. We didn't have all these, we had some wars. I'm not saying, they didn't create any wars themselves, but generally I think there was a more stable world. And they were also a good option for countries that wanted to free themselves from imperialists. And then people could turn to them and have favorable conditions. Russia's trying to fill a bit that role, but it's not really there. And it's too passive, I think, on the world stage. And so is China. Like China's just waiting and waiting and waiting. But you know what? I think in the end, like you can't just wait because the world is changing so much that you're waiting and maybe like the world would just look so different. So I think this would be the time for all of them to actually come together. Maybe if Iran wins this, it can be the starting point for a kind of more active alliance.
Yes. China is amazing on one hand. It's really the only superpower I can think of who's become a superpower with no wars at all, just based on geoeconomics and no geopolitics at all, which is great for China, but that's not what the allies and other smaller countries are hoping for. They want some protection and they want China to now actually stand up when it's time to be counted.
Yeah. And I just think it's so funny how European leaders were like, oh no, Donald Trump, how terrible, the crazy person. We don't like it. No. And then, a couple of years later, they're like, oh, Donald, you look so good.
Daddy.
It's just really pathetic. They have no spine. And, I even miss, for all that I was complaining about her during the Greek crisis, I miss, Angela Merkel of Germany. I just miss big leaders in general.
Yeah, I don't know what's happened to Germany. Germany's gone so pathetic. Germany needs to get a spine, and they've kind of let their economy be destroyed right in front of their very eyes.
Yeah, I know. I know they have their connection to Israel and all that, but they also had a connection to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Which is gone now.
In China, yeah.
Yeah.
Kajsa, thank you so much for your time and analysis. I've loved this conversation. For people listening, if they wanted to follow your work, what's the best way to see what you're doing? Do you have like a blog or a website that they can visit?
Well, I have a website, but I'm not really putting everything up there because most of what I write is in Swedish.
Okay.
Yeah, they can come to my Facebook or Instagram where I mostly post most of my articles and other things, and maybe translate them somehow.
Yeah, sure. Please do send me the handles and I'll put them in the notes. But also they can search for you on YouTube, because I've found so many really amazing talks that you're doing on so many different topics that we can maybe talk about one day. How many languages can you speak, by the way?
Oh, so Swedish, English, French, Spanish. I mean, those languages I can lecture in.
Italian, I've heard you speak. I think you've written a book in Italian as well.
No, actually, it was translated. I didn't write it in Italian. I mean,
Okay.
Italian, if you speak any like Latin language, you understand the rest. So I can understand Italian, Portuguese, and all that. And Catalan, I can speak. And yeah, I'm okay in Greek as well.
Amazing. I'm so envious. Kajsa, thank you so much. Lovely speaking to you. Have a very lovely day and hope to have you back soon.
Yeah, thanks to you. It was great talking to you, actually. It's such a fluent conversation.